If you've ever tried painting with a traditional medium, you know how unforgiving it can be. And although you have very few consequences digitally, you can still end up with an image that doesn't look good. Whether working traditionally or digitally, it's still extremely important to work with intention and plan your art to get a good painting. My name is Ludovico Clovis, and this is the first video in a series of videos covering building painterly habits in Rebelle. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to plan out your paintings using the fundamentals like value, temperature, contrast, etc. And I'm sure you hear about planning your values first all of the time, but I'll be breaking it down so that you understand it and can actually apply it. So after watching this, you'll be able to plan an image from start to finish. You'll have a digital and traditional friendly process, and you won't be overthinking settings or tools in your painting program. Before we proceed, I do have one rule. We're only going to use one brush, because using one brush will reduce the mental capital we spend focusing on brushes and allow us to focus on shapes, have intentional edges, and overall give us a more traditional feeling in Rebelle. Since we won't be worried about settings and tools, we'll just keep the settings quite similar and just work with one brush, so it won't be overwhelming at all. So here's an overview of what you'll learn today. I'll be explaining the point everyone ignores when it comes to planning your images and the fundamentals, and it's extremely important. I'll be explaining how to use values, their importance. I'll be going over some examples. I'll be showing you how to go from values to colors, how to use color, pick color, and I'll share my secret hacks and explain the good way and the bad way to use color. And finally, I'll do a demo showing you the exact process I used to make these pieces, and particularly this piece. So, the missing piece, what everyone ignores. The thing that makes everything make sense, the fundamentals make sense, is the center of interest, which is the intentional direction of the viewer. Values and colors are tools to direct us to the center of interest. What most people tell you to do is to paint in black and white, but this doesn't teach you anything but to see in black and white. If I show you my work and put it in black and white, it's not going to do anything for you. It's as good as this image here. But when you ask, how does an artist use values to create a center of interest, that's when you benefit from the principles. Okay. So first of all, let's get into values. Values are the most influential element of art, and you can observe this through seeing the impact values have on an image from far away. We have two circles with triangles inside. When I zoom out, you can see one easier, and one is harder to see. This is because values are the most basic or primitive way to create contrast, and we see using difference or contrast. That's why we use black pen on white paper. It's easier to see. So values are used to make something visible, and values are used to manage attention. We don't simply copy the values other artists use, we study how they use values to make elements visible, and how they use values to make you pay attention to elements, which is the center of interest or focal points. You can see the first example I have of 4 people. Everyone is equal, and everyone is visible. That's good. But the second example, everyone is still visible, but one person stands out. This is what we study values for. When studying values, try and see how an artist uses values to increase or decrease visibility, or to make a center of attention / focal point. Here are 2 examples, an older piece of mine and a newer one. Both of these pieces are from my imagination. When I do a value study, you can observe all the waves are visible, and the rocks and the clouds. And with this other piece, you can clearly see the man, and you can also see the specter in the distance. This is how I created visibility using my values. Now, this is what distinguishes the 2 pieces. If you look at this Pokemon painting, all of these shapes are the same size and have the exact same amount of contrast. From far away, they all stand out equally. But with this other piece, the character is the largest, and he also has the most contrast. The specter has a small amount of contrast, but he's smaller, so naturally less attention goes to him. This is how you apply values. Now, adjusting the Pokemon painting, I'd simply ensure that he's the lightest thing here, and that the other elements are still visible, but he's the thing that stands out. And we can observe from a distance that he's visible, he stands out, and the other elements don't compete for attention. So here's a quick checklist to work from when you're using values. Is your image high key, which means is it light with dark accents, or is it low key, which means it's dark with light accents? Use 3 to 4 values to plan the piece. And you do this because it ensures the most control and prevents you from focusing on details at this stage. And finally, focus on making a center of interest. Everything is useless if you aren't thinking about pushing the visibility of something forward or creating a focal point. Okay, so let's start by making an illustration. Now, I choose for my illustration to be more low-key, which means it's going to be mostly dark, and then it will have light values as focal points or points of contrast. And I'm keeping it simple with 3 to 4 values. As you see, the ball I make in the front is lighter than the rest, thus making it a focal point. And you see I have little piles of values with secondary values. Now this is because when you think about values, I want you to think about them in terms of groups and not just singular values. But I still keep everything compressed. Once you have the main values down, you can kind of play around with these secondary values and they won't break your composition. So color. I'll be making a separate video going over color in depth, but for this video, I'm going to give you a basic rundown of how I use color and how I understand color. So your colors are secondary to your values. We plan values first, then add color on top. If you look here and I zoom out, it's hard to see the first triangle, but it's easier to see the second one. This is a contrast in temperature. The second triangle is actually the same value as the circle, but we can see it through temperature contrast. But the first shape is a similar temperature. That's why we have difficulty seeing it. Now when it comes to color, I don't think too much about temperature all the time. I firstly think, what is my dominant color and what are my accent colors? Okay, so how do we apply color? So once again, the point I've been stressing is contrast. So to create a focal point, we're always thinking about contrast. With color, we have temperature, saturation, or hue. After selecting a color scheme, we must firstly conform the colors to the values. If we have red, we'll tint or lighten it until it fits in the value groups. And it's okay to be slightly off. If you're painting traditionally, you're not gonna get this mechanical with it. The next thing you can do is play with the saturation of each of these colors. And when you play with the saturation, it gives you a huge array of ways to play with color. You can use the color wheel to find color harmonies. Rebelle has a color harmony feature that helps you navigate through the hues that are available, and you can pick and choose whatever colors are actually lining up with these harmonies. Now, applying this in a visually pleasant way is where people tend to get stuck. So I did many color schemes for this book cover, as you can see. Now, this is also my secret color hack. You can color pick from anything you like, whether it's a plant, fabric, or another painting, and you can get a color scheme that way. Now, if you saturate the colors to the max and ask yourself, what kind of color harmony is this? You'll find that it's easier because with saturated colors, it's easy to identify that's red, that's purple, but with the desaturated ones, it's a little bit more difficult. So for this one, you can see it lines up perfectly with this color harmony. So either method would have brought you here, but you just see how different artists manage the color harmonies. The problem is that most people see the colors and they don't play with the saturation. They just go with the fully saturated colors, and you get a painting that looks like this. But having some desaturated elements creates that contrast, and obviously when we're creating contrast, we're thinking about creating centers of interest, focal points, things like that. So I keep emphasizing that because it's the intention behind how you use the color. And you could see it instantly creates intrigue through the contrast of saturation and non-saturation. So you can either use the color wheel or pick from a painting that you like I showed you, and you're gonna arrive at the same place. So, adding color. I picked purple as my dominant color, and blue is close to purple in temperature, so it's not gonna create a lot of contrast. That's usually as far as I go when I'm thinking about color temperatures, really. I also desaturate my purple because I don't want it to stand out too much. So that's another quick tip. If you have a lot of a color, you can desaturate it unless that's your style. So the value structure is being upheld mostly with some slight variation. And when I'm painting and I'm applying color, this is usually the stage where I may start making less serious lighting choices. So maybe I'll add a little bit of a reflection here and there. just to add more pops of color. And I'll also break the mold. I don't want to stick to a plan too much, or else that takes all of the fun out of painting. And just like this, you've planned out your painting from colors and values. Now I'm going to go to the final step, which is actually painting this. Now, remember when I said only use one brush? I'm just going to be using this oil bristle brush. And it's the bristle flat brush, and it's the default brush. And you can see my settings here. And I like it because it builds up texture, but not too much texture. I think it's really easy for a beginner to get realistic textures with this brush. And if you're interested in getting more realistic brush work, there is an earlier tutorial I did where I talk about how to make your work feel more traditional, and I go in depth about brush settings. So at this stage, my main focus is accuracy of shapes, brush work, but also freedom. I usually have issues imagining things, so having the chance to sit down and actually paint while I have a plan in front of me, a very detailed plan and a structure that I know works well, allows me to make crazier decisions and not worry too much about how they look or how they're going to end up looking. Because I don't want you to just create a rigid composition at the end of everything. I want you to have some fun with it. So, like I said earlier, I have trouble imagining things. So having this framework here allows the painting to the draft to almost work like a reference image that I can keep on referring to. And that allows me to get super creative if I want to, or I can just stick to it. Because I already know that the colors work, I already know that most of the shapes are working, so I can have some of those interesting brush strokes or weird marks, and I can break some of the shapes because I know I can just refer to my reference and return things if I needed to go back to something that worked, that was safe, or I can continue playing around and have fun. So here you just see me adding a little bit more canvas, so to say, to the painting, and then cleaning up the edges. And really, this is the process that I use for a lot of things, but as you get more advanced, sometimes you can start skipping the value stage and just jump straight into color. But now I'm going to show you one where I use a reference. Okay, so like I said, if you have a reference, it's a bit easier because some of the values are already there for you, but you can also play around with the values and emphasize or de-emphasize something. And early on, I'm already deciding that I want that eye to be the focal point. So I start to add more contrast inside that area. I start to add more tiny shapes inside that area. And I also allow for some edges to get lost, like in her shirt, those go away. Now I quickly go over to a color stage where I pick a complementary color palette of red and blue. And that wasn't working, so I ran over to the greens and the purples. And I started to work on that, and I started to like that. Now, something that happens when you're working with skin is that you might want to desaturate your colors a lot and slightly shift them more towards skin colors. And that's where you can play around with it. And I found that working using this process where you can actually plan out the colors helps you pick skin tones that work. So for this last one, I decided to go for a color palette that I actually don't use, which is having some greens in there, but I also wanted to reflect some of her natural skin tones in this piece. Now, one thing that you might notice is when I'm working with color, sometimes I also go away from the original values a bit. And like I said earlier, you're not stuck using the exact same values. You can shift or shimmy around a bit. Painting is about freedom. So I decided that I had the composition I wanted chosen, and I just started to get my details in. So I start with a sketch to ensure that I have the correct proportions, and this is the way you'd probably work traditionally. You'd sketch, and then because I have a reference, I can do interesting things like choose different colors as my underpainting that I'm going to allow to peek through. But if I never knew from the beginning what my colors would be, I couldn't implement such a technique. So I start putting in the skin tones, simply just working in a similar way where I'm just focusing on the big value shapes. Now, this is what they mean when they say value shapes. They mean that you group values together and you paint those, and then you can work on the edges and the transitions later. But you want to simplify what you're painting. And it's super easy, as you can see. The painting is already starting to come up. Now I got into the blending aspect of things. And you might notice a few pauses because I sometimes start squinting and seeing, do I like this? Do I not like this? And around the time when I blend, I also tend to zoom in a bit and I start refining some of the features, because obviously you have a limited amount of brushstrokes if you're working traditionally, and I'm reflecting that process here. So I'm starting to see the likeness start to form, which is a good sign for me, and I kind of abandon that area and start working everywhere else, because different aspects of a painting play off of each other. And you can see me get rid of the color reference I have a few times, and it's because you can use it as a crutch at some point. You do want to be making decisions based on what's going on with the brush strokes and what you're seeing right in front of you. It's a guide. It can be a very tight guide or a very loose guide. And now you can see me breaking from the mold, refining some of the shapes that I want to refine. And one thing I want to talk about with your edges is that a sharper edge usually demands attention, and a softened edge kind of fades away. So if you want a place to really stand out, you can sharpen the edges there. And it's the same thing with details. You can add a lot of detail to one area and then allow the rest of the areas to have less detail overall. And now I'm just going around, playing around, emphasizing things and refining structure. You see me adding more details in some areas and just trying to make the composition feel good. At the end of it all, it comes down to a kind of feelings thing. And that's what I go off. I know it's done when I feel like it's done, and I know everything is right when I feel like it's right. But these compositional tips are going to help you get over the main hurdles. Most of the decisions I made while doing this piece were made before I even laid down the final brush strokes. At that point, it was freedom. Okay, so it has been quite the journey. I hope that you guys have enjoyed watching this. Now, in summary, this is what you need to focus on each stage. In the first stage, when you're working with values, you need to focus on the shapes you're creating, the visibility of objects, the simplicity, the contrast that you're building with light and dark, and the key of the image. Second of all, when you're working with color, you need to focus on color harmonies, keeping the values similar to the initial stage, temperature contrast, and saturation contrast. Then finally, when you're painting, I'm mostly focusing on the brushwork, the accuracy and details, and I'm also ensuring that I break the mold and have a lot of fun. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section, and if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it in the comment section again.